Hello and welcome to Rob's Retro Reviews. If you haven't watched my video on the original Spyro the Dragon yet, I recommend you do that before watching this one, because I'm covering the entire Spyro PS1 trilogy and it makes sense to start at the beginning, right? For those of you that have watched that, today we're taking a look at the sequel to the original game, Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage. I say Ripto's Rage, but what it's actually called in Europe is Gateway to Glimmer. I have no idea why the name got changed for us. It's not like the word rage would have been offensive. Anyway, the reason I keep referring to it as its American name rather than being true to my European roots is that it seems the canon name for it actually is Ripto's Rage, because that's what it's called on the promotional material for the Reignited trilogy, even over here in Europe. So I guess we're just supposed to ignore the fact it was originally called Gateway to Glimmer at this point. Anyway, I'm just going to be upfront and say that Spyro 2 is one of the best, if not the best 3D platformer ever made in my opinion. It literally takes every aspect of Spyro 1 and improves upon it, making it not only one of my favourite 3D platformers, but also one of the best video game sequels ever made, along with Pokemon Gold and Silver. The first aspect of Spyro 2 that's better than 1 is the story. We open with a cutscene showing Spyro going through a portal to Dragon Shores because he wants a holiday to celebrate having beaten Nasty Nork. But then we cut to the land of Avalar, where several new characters, Elora the Fawn, the Professor, and Hunter the Cheetah, are trying to summon a dragon to help them get rid of a villain called Ripto. Spyro's journey to Dragon Shores gets interrupted and he's teleported to Avalar, where the new characters are all surprised by how small and non-threatening Spyro looks. Ripto then appears and destroys the portal, stopping Spyro from going home, and the rest of the game is basically about Spyro reluctantly helping the gang to stop Ripto and eventually becoming one of the group and actively sharing the goal. It's also about Spyro proving himself to the group. After all, they were expecting a menacing adult dragon to fly through the portal and ended up with a little child. Ripto is seen in several cutscenes throughout the adventure, always doing something evil with his henchmen Crush and Gulp, which shows us how much of a threat he is and builds him and his minions up as a true threat. So already we have a much better story than the first game, with a fully developed bad guy and a character arc with Spyro going from being a reluctant hero to a fully invested hero. It's great stuff and it's also humorous with tons of character interaction and charming dialogue. So how is the gameplay different from its predecessor? Well, at its core it's the same as Spyro 1. You have multiple hub worlds which each branch off into multiple levels, and within these levels are gems which you collect with the help of your friend and health indicator, Sparks the Dragonfly. This time though, the main collectibles are the talismans which need to be collected to gain entrance to Ripto's different layers throughout Avalar, and these are simply gained by reaching the end of the levels. This gives each level more of a feeling of conclusion rather than the abrupt feeling you could be left with in Spyro 1 when coming across the ending portal. You also have a brand new collectible in the form of orbs, and this, my friends, is where the game takes things up a notch. Most of the orbs in Spyro 2 are gained by doing side missions which are sprinkled into every level, so these can range from having an ice hockey match, feeding fish to a giant statue, shooting down sheep that have stolen UFOs, rescuing seahorses that are trapped at the top of electrified towers, and so much more. Remember how the first game lacked any objective-based gameplay? Well, this is not a problem in the slightest in Spyro 2. There's so much to do in every level that it's ridiculous. None of these side missions last too long either, so it's not like it takes away from the core gameplay. But they inject the game with an incredible amount of variety and make the levels feel way more fleshed out than any level from Spyro 1 ever did. There's so much more content here than in the first game, even going as far as to have vehicle sections, including manta rays, roller coasters, and cannons. And all of it's developed enough to be a fun and challenging addition to the Spyro universe. Along with these side missions comes a ton more NPC characters, which not only add so much more charm into the game, but also make the levels feel a lot less empty. An issue I didn't mention in Spyro 1 is that once you had collected everything in a level, it could look slightly dead and empty. But in Spyro 2, because of all these different characters hanging around the place, this issue is eradicated completely. Of course, every character is fully voice acted too, and it's perfect. There's no character that sounds lazily acted, and every voice suits its character to a T.
Even Spyro's voice has now changed, still being a bit reminiscent of the voice from 1, but a lot more grown up and way less whiny. He's a lot more relatable this time and definitely isn't annoying. His voice in this game suits him so much that they're reusing the voice actor from this game to voice Spyro in all 3 of the games of the Reignited trilogy, which is just amazing. I will say though that Spyro doesn't actually talk that much in this game. He doesn't talk back to NPCs, which basically means he only rarely says anything in cutscenes, which is fine, but a bit weird when you consider how chatty he was with the dragons in Spyro 1.
So you collect talismans to progress the story, you collect orbs to open new levels. So what do gems do this time around?
Well, say hello to the brand new character Moneybags, everyone's most hated bear in gaming. This guy basically acts as a roadblock at several moments during the game, making it so you have to pay him gems to progress. So if you don't have enough gems, you're gonna need to go back and find more before you can continue. This gives the gems a lot more worth than they had back in the first game, but what makes them even more worth collecting is that they can sometimes be used to pay for new abilities from Moneybags. First, you learn how to swim underwater, which feels just as amazing to control as the normal land gameplay, a rare thing for a PS1 era game. Then you learn how to climb, which admittedly is very contextual and not a very fun addition. And then you learn how to head bash, which again sounds cool but is perhaps a little bit underutilized. But still, each new ability has its own unique function and allows you to backtrack to earlier levels to uncover more secrets, something which you didn't need to do at all in Spyro 1. This is an example of a game that handles backtracking well, by having you revisit old levels and be able to navigate them more easily because you've gotten better at the game, and by utilising these new powers, it gives the player a sense of progression that isn't really possible without backtracking being implemented. However, the backtracking isn't necessary for every level, so it isn't too daunting when you get a new power and realise you need to revisit some older levels. As well as these new abilities you unlock, Spyro actually has a couple of new moves from the get-go. The most important of which being a hover, which can be activated at the end of a glide to get a bit more distance and height out of a jump. And this is amazing. You don't even realise anything is missing when you're playing Spyro 1, but then when you can hover in Spyro 2, it feels weird going back to 1 and not being able to do it. It just feels natural, and allowed the developers to include more precise platforming in the level design because you have that extra degree of control over your jumps. Spyro also has the ability to charge and jump at the same time, which to be fair was possible in Spyro 1, but here he jumps a lot higher, meaning it's actually possible to do a lot of the platforming challenges while never letting go of the charge button. It also makes it feel a lot better to chain together a charge, a jump, a glide, and then a hover. You wouldn't think it was possible, but they actually improved the movement controls in Spyro 2, even though there was nothing wrong with them in the first game.
Even the camera is better in Spyro 2 because you can use L1 and R1 to rotate it because they got rid of the pointless roll move. Also, the game has auto-saving, meaning you don't need to remember to manually save the game every time you want to have a break. Is there anything this game can do wrong, for God's sake?
The temporary power-ups from Spyro 1 return too, but this time there's a lot more of them and they're activated slightly differently. Rather than enemies dropping gems when defeated, they'll instead lose their soul and it'll fly into a portal somewhere in the level. If you collect enough of your defeated foes' souls, the portal will become active, and if you walk through it, you'll get a power-up. So there's a flying power-up, supercharge, super flame, super jump, and sometimes even a combination of them. These are all fun to use and open up new challenges to go back to once you've defeated enough enemies and have a map of the level in your head. The attention to detail with the game's environments is still here too, with every level featuring its own flag design, although this time they're placed more obviously, being right next to the first NPC you come across, and the different environmental objects you can interact with return too. This time though, a lot of the interactable objects actually serve a purpose, because if you charge, destroy, or flame all of them in a level, you could be rewarded with a skill point. These skill points are basically the game's hidden objectives, and you're never actually told that they exist or what to do to get them, meaning you could finish the game completely and not even know they exist. You can get them for beating bosses without getting hit, destroying or interacting with all of a certain type of object in a level, or beating certain times in the return in flight bonus levels. While they don't unlock anything mind-blowing, if you get them all you'll be rewarded with an epilogue section, which is basically just a static slideshow letting you know what happened after the events of the game. Which, just like Spyro 1's 100% ending, I'm pretty sure is non-canon. You also unlock a showcase of some enemies that were cut from the final game, which is pretty cool. I wish getting a skill point was met with a slightly bigger fanfare though, because the only feedback you're given that you've actually got one of these super secret objectives is a small sound. There's no text on the screen or anything. So it can feel a little bit underwhelming collecting them, and considering they're so hidden, you would think it would be met with a bit more oomph. It's also a little bit annoying that you're not given a slight clue as to how to get these skill points. For example, you could have been told which levels you had to play to get them, or something like that. It can make unlocking them all without the use of a guide too much of a big task, so I wouldn't really recommend doing that unless you're a hardcore fan. I just think you should have been given a little bit of a clue as to what you needed to do to get them.
A nice little reference to Spyro 1 is included in the level Fracture Hills, where you rescue a satyr trapped in stone, and I think you know what he says after being released.
Thank you for releasing me.
I have to admit that always gets a chuckle out of me. You know what doesn't get a chuckle out of me though? This tune that the satyrs play every single time you rescue one of them.
Another amazing attention to detail is that every level has its own intro and outro cutscenes, which are mostly just short skits involving the characters of that particular region. But I really like them because they introduce the level and its concepts before having you just jump in and be told what's happening. It feels a lot more involved actually seeing what's happening in the world firsthand before Spyro arrives there. There's also other little details like how certain worlds are actually connected to others. For example, there's a war going on between the inhabitants of Zephyr and Breeze Harbour, and you end up helping out both sides when you visit the respective levels, and you get to see the good guys in one level turn into the enemies in the other, and vice versa. It's a really cool touch. Although, it is a bit weird how Spyro doesn't stop the war between them, and if anything, he just fuels it even further. You would think the message would be that war is bad and they should just talk about their issues and have fun, but no. Spyro just activates a warship and then gets out of there.
There's a couple of times in this game where characters will straight up talk about killing other characters. First there's Ripto that says it.
No! You despicable little creature! I'll kill you!
But this makes sense given that he's the main villain. It's just that normally in a kid's game they'll say something like, "I'll get you," you know? But then there's a friendly NPC in the level Colossus that also talks about killing, even though that's not what it says on his subtitle.
Even though I'm a vegetarian, I think you should kill that yeti, kill that yeti, kill that yeti, kill that yeti, kill that yeti.
Kill that yeti.
Now this guy obviously has issues. He's going off script talking about death and murder. He's one to keep your eye on, that's for sure.
The sound design and music is on point just like it was in the first game too. A nice aspect of it I liked was how getting 100% on a level is met with a little animation of all of your collectibles and a trumpet tune. It just makes collecting stuff feel all that more rewarding when you see and hear that. I will admit though, there are times where the music should be kicking it up a notch and it fails to do that properly. Where this was especially apparent was in the final boss, where the music really didn't do it justice. It should have been a lot more in your face and threatening than it was, which is disappointing because the final boss, and in fact every boss in this game, is really good. They're built up through cutscenes so it doesn't feel like a random encounter, and the fights themselves have a good amount of difficulty and make you think about what you need to do rather than just being able to run in and attack normally like you can with the bosses in Spyro 1. The last boss is one of the best platformer final boss fights I've ever played. It starts with a fight just against Ripto on his own, with you and him fighting to power yourselves up using the orbs you've collected through the adventure. Then you have to fight a robotic version of Gulp, the previous boss in the game, and then you have aerial combat with you having infinite flight and a super flame ability, and Ripto flying around shooting lasers at you on a giant bird while the arena fills with lava. It's epic to say the least, and feels climactic just like a final boss should. After beating the final boss though, the game still isn't over, because you actually get to go back to the Dragon Kingdom from the first game and visit Dragon Shores, where Spyro was originally trying to go on vacation at the start of the game. This is basically a fairground on a beach where you can play some carnival games and ride on a roller coaster to win tickets, and by getting all 10 tickets you can access the cutscene viewer. A pretty decent reward. But that's not all. By getting 100% completion across the whole game, you can access this door in Dragon Shores, and behind it is Infinite Super Flame. Now this is awesome. It allows you to get certain skill points a lot easier if you haven't done that already. But having completed the game already, you'd think there wouldn't be much point in this new ability because you've already done everything. Well, if you start the game again using a new save slot, you can actually start from the beginning of the game, but keep your Infinite Super Flame, which allows you to break certain parts of the game apart and makes all of the enemies seem pathetic. Even the big ones that you can't normally flame or charge. It's an awesome reward and adds a ton of replay value too.
Something that I've always found a bit weird is how the hub worlds are named after the seasons, right? So there's summer forest, winter tundra and autumn plains. So why isn't spring represented here? It's just odd how the developers would have named the hub worlds after something which there's 4 of, and then only made 3 hub worlds. It's not really a problem, it's just more of an oddity.
While I'm on the topic of hub worlds, I just want to give a shout out to Autumn Plains. I think this is the most nostalgic area of any video game ever for me. It's so good. Just how big it feels and how peaceful and serene it is. You start in an open area with leaves falling all around you and a nice looking swimming pool. Then you can enter a castle in the background and find secret areas in there leading to the roof. And from there you can literally fly to any point in the level freely. Not only does this level have an amazing atmosphere, but the way you can not only see this far into the distance, but also fly anywhere you want, the feeling of freedom is amazing. It's just an awesome hub area, and I'm not sure anyone will get that unless you grew up playing it. Anyway, if I were to say the game had any one single problem, I would say there's this one bit of the game where backtracking isn't handled well. In the level Fracture Hills, you do a side mission where you have to guide an alchemist to Hunter who has been trapped in concrete boots. You do this and get an orb, but then Hunter offers you another side mission. The thing is, you can't do this side mission unless you have the head bash move, which you unlock later in the game. That's fine, you just carry on and get the ability and come back later. But then you have to replay the whole alchemist side mission all over again rather than being able to just do Hunter's mission. And this alchemist mission is infamous for being quite difficult to complete because of how quickly the enemies will attack and how the alchemist will just walk directly into the enemies and change directions while you're supposed to be protecting him. This could have been solved if the game remembered that you had done the alchemist quest and just allowed you to help Hunter, but this isn't the case and can cause a lot of wasted time. But yeah, this and the music not kicking up enough during high tension moments are pretty much the only issues I have with this game. There is a couple of times where the same music is reused for 2 different levels, but this happens so infrequently that it's not really too much of a problem. Spyro 2 takes everything the first game does and expands on it, making it better in every way possible. The controls are better, the story is better, the graphics are more diverse, there's new gameplay mechanics and objectives in every level, the voice acting is better. It just makes Spyro 1 look like a beta or a proof of concept when it's compared to Spyro 2, and that's saying something considering how good Spyro 1 is. So I'm giving Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage a 9 out of 10. I was so close to making this my first ever 10 out of 10 for a video review, but I can't ignore the one backtracking problem and the fact that for me, the music isn't right for the bosses. There is also that small issue with the skill points where you're not given enough indication about how to get them, but these problems are so easily ignored when the rest of the game is as good as this. This is an absolute must-play game, and I'm so glad that it's going to be available for a bigger audience on the PS4 and Xbox One soon. It's just awesome.
So that's my thoughts on Spyro 2, but the question now is, can the third game in the series, Spyro Year of the Dragon, step things up even more and fix the very few issues I had with the second game to gain that fabled Rob's Retro Reviews 10 out of 10 rating? Well, you'll have to join me in my next video to find out.
Thanks so much for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to see my final video in the Spyro Trilogy retrospective very soon. Also, let me know in the comments what your favourite area of Spyro 2 is. For me, it's 100% Autumn Plains. I just love it. Anyway, until next time, bye!